And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. Who is able to make war with him?
Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to the Midnight Ride. I am so thankful to be able to welcome each and every one of you into the Puritan Barn, into the NYSTV studios for another Midnight Ride with myself and John Pounders. Tonight, the avatars of Tartaria and the wizards of Shambala. We have explored the concept of our government actually making contact and being in league with Nephilim entities. Well, tonight we're going to be presenting evidence that leaders in the occult world, I believe, have done the same. So get ready. This is going to be frosty, and it all starts right now because we are now
live. What's up, guys? We're here once again in the Puritan Barn. I hope you guys have had a good week. Let us know where you're from in the chat. Let us know how you're doing in the comments. Let us know. David, how's your week been?
It's been very good. It's been very good. We're very blessed and thankful. And, the good reports just keep coming in, so we're thankful.
Very much so, man. And before we come back and talk about this subject, I would like to introduce you to a word from our sponsors. Many mainstream companies put dangerous chemicals in their products that contribute to disease and disability. This is why it's so important that we take care in the products that we consume. The skin is the largest organ in your body, and it is the covering to your temple. Our sponsor tonight is Sugar and Spice Soap Company. They create all natural and biblically clean soaps and beauty products. They even have a soap for Midnight Ride listeners. Use coupon code NYSTV to receive 10% off all your purchases. Link in the description.
You work together or you'll die alone!
All right, guys, thank you for checking that out. If you're interested in any of that, make sure to go check out the links below in the description. Also, you can check out our websites, nystv.org, where you can find exclusive content only available in nystv.org, plus all of our archived videos that we've done in the past, and you can check out all those there. You can also go to fojcradio.com and check out David and Donna Carrico's books, their information, all the stuff they've had for the last 40 years. They've compiled into one website, so make sure you guys check that stuff out. And we do have upcoming shows this week on other channels. We've got all kinds of stuff going on for you guys. FOJC on the Underground Church, they have a show called Sunday Night Live going on this Sunday night. We also have Breaking Babylon over on Breaking Babylon's YouTube channel with myself and John Hall going live over there. and a lot of other stuff going on too. So make sure you subscribe. And I think if you go to our channel, it has a list of a bunch of different channels there, and you guys can check those out and see if you like that content. And if not, no big deal. At least you're here riding the ride with us, because things are about to get a little bit squirrely. So make sure you hold on to your saddles. And with that being said, David, if you don't got anything else, let's get ready for the ride.
All right. Well, I just might make a brief mention that this Sunday night going to be a Sunday night live on our Underground Church YouTube channel. I kind of feel good about. It's called The Ancient Flood of the Garden of Eden. Did you know there was one? Well, we're going to be looking into that. And so join us for that on our Underground Church channel. All right, then. We're going to begin the ride here. The Avatars of Tartaria and the Wizards of Shambala. And that title will become very apparent as we go forward. And we're beginning here with the picture of Madame Blavatsky, who was a Russian lady. And we're going to be looking at things tonight from a distinctive Russian perspective. We're going to be looking at Russian leaders in the occult in Russia and Russian historians to get a feel for the way that they look about themselves. And we're going to be showing things that have been discovered by Russian archaeologists that have very little exposure and are very little known. So I think there's going to be some really good, interesting and edifying things here. Now, we're going to note something about this lady. She died in the 1890s. And in this article, in Man, Myth, and Magic, there's something that she said that I want to take note of, and we want to think about this. And she made some amazing claims. And in this article in Man, Myth, and Magic, it said she claimed to be under the telepathic guidance of certain Mahatmas, whose present country of residence was not India. Now, she is more than saying that she is in contact with some spiritual entity. She is claiming to be in contact with an entity that was living upon the earth. She goes on to say these were adepts or initiates, masters of occult wisdom, who had attained spiritual liberation from the world, but stayed below to help mankind. They lived in Tibet, where secret caves housed enormous libraries. Her own chief master was Kuthumi, and she had another named Mora. And Miss Blavatsky claimed, and I quite frankly, I have kind of filed this under too nutty to take seriously, but here lately, the way I've been thinking, and I begin to rationalize, if it's easy to believe for me that the government has entered into league with Nephilim, why not people in the occult world that have actually made contact? And in Manly P. Hall's book, here, The Phoenix, it gives a little more information about her Mahatmas. It says, to the uninitiated, the handsome Oriental was merely a Rajput prince, but to Madame Blavatsky, he was Master Mora, one of the world's great souls, an adept of the Trans-Himalayan Brotherhood. Although known to Madame Blavatsky as Mahatma Mora, he seems also to have used the name Azhulama, or the Blue Teacher, and according to the conservative records of the day, was 125 years of age at the time of this visit to England. So when old Mora went over to England to hang out with Madame Blavatsky, he was already 125 years old, and we're going to encounter this Mahatma like 60 years later, showing up and making contact with Alice Bailey. Now, we have here the picture. There's a drawing of Miss Blavatsky with her Mahatmas, and here is a drawing that she made of Mora and Kuthumi. And there are three. We're going to identify the three main Mahatmas, or avatars, they would be Mora, Kuthumi, and the Christ. And the Christ or the Maitreya. And these are the three. And Blavatsky passed away in the late 1800s. And Mr. Mora was already 125 years old, and he was pretty well preserved. According to their records, he'd have been about 190 years old when he was hanging out with Alice Bailey in the late 50s. But what I have come to take very seriously, and I've come to the conclusion through studying the claims that the elite occultists made, we could look at Blavatsky, we could look at Annie Besant, Charles Leadbeater, the hierarchy there of Theosophy, Benjamin Creme, and the Baileys, and also a big connection we're going to show you with the Russian mystics, Nicholas Roerich, who is tied in with the Baileys and Lucius Trust, and we're going to show you the real impact of Nicholas Roerich, one of the Russian mystics. And in the Russian mindset, this was called the Trans-Himalayan Brotherhood, of these so-called secret locations where there were deep caves and libraries of unbelievable knowledge that were there. And we're going to be showing an actual location. The Russians took this very seriously, and we're going to be talking about several expeditions by Russian occultists and Russian archaeologists to actually find, it was known as Argatha, Shambala, or Hyperborea. It's pretty well known, the exploits of Adolf Hitler and his serious efforts to find the entrance to Hyperborea, and he was even making plans to breed the German people with the people from the inner earth. So Hitler took it very serious, and also these, a couple I'm sure you've never heard the names before, but we're going to introduce you to a couple Russian archaeologists and explorers, and we're going to show you an amazing site that they found that is nothing less than absolutely off the hook. And
I would say this, man. It's interesting because obviously we've studied so many different renderings of this story, from all the way to even the Hopi Indians. Their story of these people that lived underground, bringing them back up after the flood, teaching them civilization. And almost every civilization that you go to, David, and especially in like Buddhism, Hinduism, they all date back to this interesting Aryan ideology, these Aryan people, or people, they call them people, whatever you want to call them. Of course, now in the alien movement, we're looking at them more as possible angelic beings that are abducting people. People are always pointing out these beings. But in every civilization, every story where you have major civilizations, you have these key figures at the top. And this is just almost another rendering of that story in Theosophy.
yeah, it really is. And the what's a little bit different, and like in this book here, The Externalization of the Hierarchy, this book was written in 1957 by Alice Bailey, and Madame Blavatsky's impact was absolutely huge. She is called the mother of the New Age movement. She wrote a 2-volume work called The Secret Doctrine, which is scripture to the people in the occult. Another big 2-volume work called Isis Unveiled. And she literally laid the foundation for Theosophy and for the occult movement in the 20th century. And these other figures, the people that claim direct contact with these Mahatmas, and they're just Nephilim, they're the ones that have shaped the modern thought in the occult. And the reason why we call it the avatars of Tartaria is because it is from the area of Tartaria that these avatars come from, and the wizards of Shambala, all of these traditions place these wizards that came out and contact from being in the inner earth. And Shambhala, or Argata, or Hyperborea, take your pick, and we're going to even show you another Russian name, Bilovadia, of another name for this inner earth concept. It's huge in Russia. And this is the very area that it comes from, and it's not coincidental. And we're going to be showing you tonight a site that could be according to this Russian archaeologist, he says that this was the outpost of Shambala, and no doubt very near the actual place of the entry point to the Hollow Earth. Now, in this book here, Externalization of the Hierarchy, and Alice Bailey and Foster Bailey was a Freemason, and he lectured in Masonic lodge halls all over the world. I have his book called The Spirit of Freemasonry, and Alice Bailey was the head of Theosophy and of Lucis Trust there, that had its office right there in the UN. Also connected with Lucis Trust is this Russian occultist, Nicholas Roerich, which we're going to be talking about at length, because he had a plan to bring Shambhala out of the heart of the earth onto the top, manifesting Shambhala on the earth, and the externalization of the hierarchy, and we've thought a lot, we've talked about the alien scenario, how that we believe that we're going to see the return of these creatures, and they're going to be hailed as, space brothers to come to save us. But here I think we're getting a very realistic look that these entities, like we have supposed many times, they're in the heart of the earth, and they're going to externalize. And that's what these writings are about. They've talked about this for decades, of this hierarchy coming out and manifesting itself on the earth.
Yeah, man, it's interesting to me too. There's so much out of this theosophy and out of this secret doctrine that just people don't realize how much our world is shaped by the views of this, and just even the classification of the races of human beings is based 100% off of these teachings about the 7 root races and where all of this stuff comes from. These beings that were supposedly from Atlantis that cropped up to show knowledge again. We talked about that, I think, David, in a couple shows back, where you talked about the 7 sages.
Yes.
And this all connects to that as well.
Yeah. And let's just throw, before we get into this, let's just throw out, just for fun, the saga of Valiant Thor. And Valiant Thor, I know you're familiar with that, John, about Mr. Frank Strangus, who was a strange guy, but Mr. Frank Strangus had contact for many years with the fellow that called himself Valiant Thor. And what's interesting, Valiant Thor has been photographed with many leaders in the Pentagon, with some very elite leaders. And so, I do believe that these Nephilim are coming out and coming at us. Now, on page 504, Miss Bailey writes this: certain of the masters have the work under their control, and through their group disciples are already actively engaged in the work of preparation. Preparation for what? The externalization of the hierarchy coming out. He goes on to say the master, Mora, the master, KH, Kuthumi, and those are the 2 pictures that we showed you, and the master Jesus are the 3 working at this time in closest cooperation with the Christ. So this book came out in 1957, so this is going to make old Master Moya right now 190, 200 years old. So we're not talking about human entities, obviously. And for many years, I would just say, well, these people are just not being serious here, but I'm beginning to think they're being very serious, that they had actually made contact with Nephilim entities from the heart of the world, and these Nephilim masters had chosen these individuals as vessels. And the very and John mentioned the idea of the root races that comes from Blavatsky. This is what motivated Adolf Hitler. This was one of the very lightning rods that sprang World War II. It inspired the Bolsheviks, and on and on and on. Alice Bailey goes on to say here on page 505, the Master Mora is at this time acting as the inspirer the inspirer of the great national executives throughout the world. And Miss Bailey claimed that this Mahatma was in physical real-time contact with many of the leaders and influencing them. And I think that's absolutely possible. And if you study the scenario and look into the scenario of Valiant Thor, it's pretty interesting. Pretty interesting indeed.
One thing that I think a lot of times, our civilizations fail to remember, especially as believers, remember that these demonic Nephilim entities have been around through many cycles of the earth. They've seen the destruction of cycles. They've seen technology rise. They've seen it fall. And when you look at Freemasonry and you look at the inner circles of Freemasonry, all the way up to the Illuminati, the most secret parts of these inner societies, they all claim to have this secret knowledge. And in my mind, these entities, they know how to take advantage of these cycles. They know how to take advantage of the loss of technology, and then they know how to sprinkle technology throughout time, sprinkle it back in, and give it back into us to a point to where we get so advanced that we destroy ourselves. And I think we fail to realize that we have this real enemy that resides within the earth and on the earth that is coming after us. The idea that there are entities that have been cast into the earth is a very real concept in the Bible as well.
It is indeed. And what Miss Bailey claimed, and this was written here, this part of this writing, January 1946. It says, the hierarchy directs world events as far as mankind will permit. The hierarchy directs and controls more than is realized. And she claimed that these individuals were exerting a lot of control among the world leaders. And then on page 522, she says the invocative appeal to the Lord of the world in his council chamber at Shambala has been mounting for some time. It has been called the appeal for alignment because the members of the hierarchy feel and know that this great return to the earth, which has been arranged for the hierarchy after so long an absence. And it talks about the council chamber of Shambhala, and this is the, Three Dog Night, the road to Shambhala. And this Shambhala, as I said, this is a word for the realm in the heart of the earth. It's called Shambhala, Argatha, Hyperborea, Bilovadia in parts of Russia. And this is this ancient place that was believed to be in somewhere in the Trans-Himalayan area. Now, here we have another fella, and this is also very, very interesting. He came along and he also claimed to have contact with these entities. And this was a British gentleman by the name of Benjamin Krim, the reappearance of the Christ and the Masters of Wisdom. This is just the title tells it all. And he is just continuing the work of Blavatsky and Alice Bailey. He also claimed to be in personal contact with these entities. Now, on the page 22 of this book, he writes, it is an enormous and embarrassing claim to have to make that the Christ is giving messages through oneself. But if people can rid their minds of the idea Christ as some sort of spirit sitting in heaven at God's right hand, if they can begin to see him as indeed he is, as a real and living man, albeit a divine man who has never left the world, who descended not from heaven, but from his ancient retreat in the Himalayas. Mm-hmm. So there we go. We got this guy, don't think about him being at the right hand of the Father, but their guy is out in the Himalayas. And indeed, I believe in the frozen north, where these myths of Shambhala and Argartha have been there so strong, and there's no place that they are any stronger than in the country of Russia. He writes on page 30, he says, at this point, when the Aquarian age is dawning, the masters of the hierarchy are now ready to return for the first time in countless thousands of years to the everyday world. And he claimed that the Lord Maitreya was actually, since 1977, was in London, and that he was in personal contact with the Lord Maitreya. And just like the occultist before him, he writes on page 74 that it's all from Shambala. He says Shambala is a center of energy, the major center in the planet. It corresponds to the crown center in the head of man, and from it, through it flows the energy we call will. Shambala is a physical center. And he went so far. In 1982, this is a book called The Hidden Dangers of the Rainbow, and I remember these days so much. Constance Cumby was the first one to really expose Lucius Trust and Benjamin Krim and all of those. And I did radio with Constance Cumby. Donna's probably got the tape somewhere at home, way back in the early 80s. And we were all over this back in the day. And in 1982, Benjamin Krim spent over $500,000, and he ran ads in major newspapers and magazines all over the world, and it says, "The Christ is now here." And Mr. Krim made boasts that very soon that he was going to unveil Lord Maitreya to the world. Didn't happen, did it? But this has been their goal. They have worked at this for a long time, and these people are still working at bringing the externalization of the hierarchy, which is nothing less than bringing these Nephilim out of the heart of the earth to portray them as avatars, as ascended masters. We don't know how they're going to do it, aliens, whatever, but that's who these folks are going to be. They're going to be the wizards of Shambhala, the very Nephilim from the heart of the earth.
It's interesting. There's a lot of local headquarters for Lucas Trust. There's actually one in St. Croix, Indiana, but their main headquarters right now is in New York.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and this goes back. It was originally started by Madame Blavatsky with her Lucifer magazine. And literally, and I've actually got some old material from them. It was called Lucifer Trust. And after that began to draw the ire and attention from Christians, there were a few Christians back then that would care and try to expose it. They changed the name of Lucius Trust from Lucifer Trust to Lucius Trust. So they're all about Lucifer. They really are. And they're all about making claims. These people have made these claims for well over 100 years that they are in direct contact with these Nephilim ascended masters. Now, in this next slide, we're going to show you an amazing sight. Now, this is the Kola Peninsula. This is the Kola Peninsula, and this was explored in the 1920s by a Russian archaeologist called Alexander Barchenko. And we're going to show you what Mr. Barchenko found there. And there to the left, you can get an idea of where this is. This is right on the Arctic Circle. This is rugged, rugged, rugged land. This is some of the coldest and the most unfriendly land on this good old flat earth. And we're going to be showing you, and I'll be reading you some of the things that Mr. Barchenko, and Mr. Barchenko was searching for Shambhala. And he believed that what he found here on the Kola Peninsula by Lake Said was one of the very outposts of Shambhala. Now, I'll read a little bit from a book. This is entitled Occult Russia, and it talks about the explorations of Alexander Barchenko. How many of you have ever heard of Alexander Barchenko? Nobody, right? You know, how many's ever heard of the Kola Peninsula? Me and John never had. Now, this book, Occult Russia, and we're going to show you just how amazing this is. And this was, Mr. Barchenko was fascinated with Hyperborea, and he wanted to find the entrance to it, and I don't know how he knew to get to this place, but through something, it led him there to the Kola Peninsula, and this is an account of what he found there, and we're going to be showing you pictures of this. It says here on page 56 of Occult Russia, speaking of his expedition in the 20s, the expedition headed for the very center of the Kola Peninsula, in the area of Lake Sade, which is sacred to the Sami. Here, in mountainous terrain and difficult to reach at an altitude of approximately half of a kilometer from the lake level, we found a gigantic megalithic complex with cyclopean structures, defensive masonry, and geometrically regulated slabs carved with mysterious signs. Lastly, there were remains of an observatory formed out of the rock formations and with a 15-meter gutter aimed at the sky. It distantly resembled a distant sextant at the famous observatory of Ulgbek near Samarkand. They also found more than 10 labyrinths laid out in stones, which Doyman was convinced were the prototypes of the labyrinths found in Crete and elsewhere. And last but not least, they found pyramids that were larger and older than the pyramids in Egypt. Anyone ever hear that one before? Well, there they are, and there's a picture. This is a what we would classify as a step pyramid, like we would have in Egypt at I can't pronounce the name of it, so I won't. Pharaoh Tozer, and the oldest pyramid in Egypt is Saqqara. Thank you, Dave. Saqqara. And the oldest pyramid there is the step pyramid of Tozer and Saqqara. And these are step pyramids. And you can see absolutely these are not man-made structures. They're just too perfect, and there's three of them. And these are larger and older than the Egyptian pyramids. Now, that gets my attention right off. And why are these things buried and we don't know about it? I think quite likely because we are looking at an area that is one of the actual, just like Mr. Barchenko said, one of the outposts of Shambala, where, as it has been reported all through the Tibetan mountains and through the frozen north, all kinds of stories of huge underground caves and libraries and these entities living. So I think Mr. Barchenko could very well be right that this is one of the very outposts of Shambhala.
It reminds me so much of the pyramids that they found in South America that were completely covered with, trees. I mean, just cover. You would think it's a mountain by looking at it, but these are even more defined than what those were prior to them clearing it off and creating a tourist site out of it. These are well defined, and there's a lot of people that would say, okay, water could have created those steps, but not likely. I mean, especially after talking about what they found there as well, David, that you're going to be talking about here in a minute.
Yeah, and I read about 3 different spin articles, and there are definitely archaeologists that say no way that this is man-made, and it obviously isn't. But there are definitely spin articles out there saying it's just man-made. There's nothing like this that exists naturally in nature. It just does not exist. But what does exist are step pyramids in Saqqara, Egypt, and in South America that are just like this. And it's the studied opinion of archaeologists that these are the very oldest and the most primitive pyramids. Now, also, there are 10 huge labyrinths. And if we remember the story of the labyrinth in Crete, that the monster, the Minotaur, was in this labyrinth at Crete. And we have 10 huge labyrinths here. And these are massive. And there's 10 of them. And it's just absolutely amazing. And beyond that, I'll read you a little more of a laundry list of some stuff that was found here. It says here, this is on page 50 from Occult Russia. It says, exploring the interior of the peninsula, Barchenko's team found some remarkable things. An island covered with reindeer horns that was a sacred place for the Sami, an ancient paved road about 1.5 kilometers long, stone pyramids, fallen columns, and a rock face with the dark silhouette of a giant human figure. So we got it all here. We got giants, we got pyramids, we got labyrinths, the biggest and the oldest that have ever been found. This is no doubt a very, very significant site. And this is probably, I think Mr. Barchenko is right. This is probably the very outpost and probably the very entrance unto Shambala or Argatha, take your pick, is right in this area. And that is quite likely why this site has been really kept out of the public purview. But I think it's time for us to kind of take a look at this, because I think that this here is beyond significant. Now, this is a picture from this book, Occult Russia, and this is on an apartment building. It's a huge mural from the Russian city of Omsk, and this is a picture of an artist rendition of another one of the Russian concepts. It's called Bilabdia. And Bilabdia is another Russian name for this inner earth civilization. And there's a Russian TV series called Bilabdia. And this is big in Russian pop culture. It's big in the traditions of Russia. They are so all about this. And all of the leading Russian mystics and Russian occultists, Blavatsky, Gurdjieff, Rasputin, Rorich, all of them, they held close to their heart this tradition of Hyperborea, and they were very, very serious. Nicholas Rorich also made an expedition to try to uncover the entrance to Hyperborea. And it sounds like the folks at Hyperborea, they said, well, don't call us, we'll call you. And they have chosen certain individuals that they have desired to make contact with and have entered in league with them to promote the ideas and the concepts that they want. And it's all about conditioning, isn't it? It's all about the externalization of the hierarchy. It's about preparing the popular public mindset to where these people can manifest themselves. And Benjamin Creme was going to have a go at it at 1982, couldn't pull it off. But these people have been working feverishly at the externalization of the hierarchy, and they have claimed to be in actual contact with these Mahatmas, a.k.a. Nephilim, that are hundreds of years old. And I think they're telling the truth. And I think this is a definitive plan, and I think they're working at it just as hard as their little selves can work.
I think it's interesting looking at this graphic. You see the 3 bearded trees above this little, I would say, shelter of sorts. Maybe, in different religions, this is how they would meet with their God, in some kind of ark-like sculpture in the middle of these two men sitting there staring at each other. And, it reminds me of, obviously, in the Garden of Eden, the trees that were in the Garden of Eden, the tree of good and evil, the tree of life. And also the Assyrian was spoken of as a tree.
Yes.
With big leaves or big branches that basically exceeded over the entire area. So it's really interesting, man. I try to break down look at these things and break them down, but this is also Tartarian architecture here at the bottom there. This city that almost looks like Atlantis, but with the rings city around it.
It really does.
Yeah.
That's what you have to think of, don't you? You
Yeah.
have the rings surrounded by water, and all of these traditions dovetail together. Atlantis, by Labdia, they're all talking about this ancient place. And by the way, tomorrow or Sunday night, Tracy and I are going to be talking about the ancient flood of the Garden of Eden, and she's pulled together a lot of slides. We've showed some of them here. It was Lord of the Rings and the Wizard of Oz. They had these talking trees. And here we see them again, don't we? We see these trees with faces. What did it mean when the Bible said the Assyrian was a cedar in the Garden of Eden? Maybe something like this? And if you remember in the Gospels, when Jesus healed the blind men, what he said, I see men as trees walking. Could it be that man got a glimpse into the spiritual realm and he actually saw some of these things? I believe that is indeed the case.
Yeah, I know Lord Brahma in the Vedic text, which is the Aryan text, kind of what we're been speaking about here, is connected as being a tree with roots. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And Lord Shiva relates to the tree trunk and Lord Shiva, so it's interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, we're going to talk about something else here that is very interesting, and we're going to be looking at some of the Russian historians and some Russian history. We've talked about a lot of these concepts before, and they're beginning to dovetail, and the dots are beginning to connect. And I want to talk a little bit about a fella he's talked about on page 8 in this book, and his name is Ilya Muromets, and he was a member of the Bogatyr group of elite knights, and he was, and this is an absolute parody of the court of King Arthur. And this Ilya Muromets, you just can't make this stuff up, but he was a defender of Kyiv in the 10th century. And right back there at the Ukraine, that's in the news right now. But this fella, Ilya Muromets, he was portrayed as a King Arthur figure. Now, we talked about another fella, and John, you brought this up for the first time, and you referenced this book here by William Herbert. And this has just deeply fascinated me ever since, that Attila the Hun, who considered himself to be the Antichrist, was also associated with the legend of King Arthur. And many believe that Attila the Hun created the story of King Arthur to endear himself to the Brits and to the pagan Brits, that he would go there and manifest himself as the Antichrist and overthrow Christianity in Britain.
And there was a real opportunity for that to happen because of the Dark Ages. In the history of the kings of Britain, you see this time period happening to where all of a sudden plagues break out, even causing the king, Charles I, to even get out of Dodge. And you see different armies approaching Britain, attacking them, taking them over really at one point. Rome actually has a huge hand in this too. But then you have this introduction of King Arthur into that time of great hardship, and there was no real history recorded over in that area. And that's why a lot of people think that. Plus, I think I brought out in that show too. There's a book written, an article written that shows the achievements of Attila the Hun lined up with the mythological achievements or the historical achievements, I guess some would say, of King Arthur. And there's no other figure, no other person in history that would have been around to create such feats at the time, because as you know, Attila the Hun, well, as you know, I say that, as we know, Attila the Hun controlled almost the entire Silk Road, almost entirety of Asia. Rome paid tribute to Attila. Britain would have paid tribute to Attila. Everybody paid tribute to Attila, making him probably the most dominant ruler of that time period. Of course, a lot of that's covered up, and the fact that he created knighthoods, he created little lodges all over everywhere he went, and he also had looked like King Arthur. He was a redheaded knight, valiant-looking knight. All the depictions of him prior to the snuffing of history depict him in this way. So there's a lot there, David. You're right, man. It's one of those mystery puzzles that I think it's like you stumble upon it, and it's just things start to unravel in a big way if you can imagine it. Because I mean, who would even think Attila the Hun? You know, Attila the Hun, you think of an Asian, wispy-haired, Asian bearded, wispy-bearded, like wizard-looking guy riding a little tiny horse, when in reality he was a warrior that rode. It was like a knight, more like a knight.
He had the sword of Mars.
Yes.
And this sword of Mars was the obvious correlation to Excalibur in the King Arthur story. You just file this under, you can't make it up. Now and I'm going to read just a little bit here from this Herbert book, but just think about it. Here, and this is all the same people. This is all the Scythian bloodline. And we have the Scythian bloodline come about, and some of them here, well, they go off into the area of Ukraine and European Russia, and the Huns, they go to the south, but it's the same bloodline, it splits. And during this same time period, from the same genetic stock, we have Ilya Mulametz in the area of Ukraine, and also Attila the Hun, both claiming to be in the King Arthur tradition. Now, what is the possibility of that?
Yeah.
And it's very significant, because this story, and these people were very cunning, very crafty. They weren't a bunch of stupid savages. And they were using this very concept to install themselves as the beast system. And by golly, they done pretty good, almost got her done. Now, I'll just read a little bit here from this William Herbert book. And it says, the legends of St. Patrick and Arthur, which are contemporaneous with and have evident reference to him, Attila the Hun, do not represent the influence and authority which he had acquired in the British Isles through his emissaries and the weight of his anti-Christian pretensions, but respect to his dominion over the Danish and Scandinavian territory. And this Scandinavian territory, if you note where the Kola Peninsula was, that's right where that is, right where it is. So it's just amazing. And also, Mr. Herbert ties the legend of St. Patrick, that St. Patrick quite likely never existed, but this was just another story created by Attila the Hun, and it represented the snakes, a.k.a., in his mindset, the Christians being run out. So I don't know. It's deeply fascinating, but there are so many things here that we just cannot write off to coincidence. And these are things that are held very dear by the Russian people in their mindset and the way that they look at themselves.
And I mean, to even point out some more history about that area, like there was a area called Humburg, I believe, Hamburg, and there was a giant named Humburg where Gog and Magog actually fought in this town, according to a couple history books. One is called there's Cornelius and Magog, and then another one is Gog and Magog. And it's a really interesting story, but man, like, I know you're going to talk a little bit about Gog Magog here in a little bit, but this giant was a Hungarian king, a Hun king.
Oh boy,
that makes it even more interesting, I think.
Yeah.
That they were overthrowing there in that area to win back Londonia, the princess, or Londana, where they named London from, the princess. There's a lot of mythology, or a lot of allegory there that just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it really, really, really does. And it's a real paradigm of understanding that makes way too much sense. It really does. We're going to talk about another one of the Russian occultists, Nicholas Roerich, a very, very important figure in a lot of ways. He was a painter. He was a musician. He was tied in with the Russian opera and the Russian ballet. Very influential person in Russian society. And even beyond that, he also had a plan, and it was through a opera called Prometheus. And he thought that through this opera, Prometheus, Shambala could be manifested on the earth. I guess just kind of through some kind of a mystic takeover. Didn't work, but he was trying. And he also was an explorer, and he personally went on searches to find the entrance to Shambhala. Very serious about it. They were very serious about it. And it's also interesting that Roerich was tied in absolutely with the Baileys and with Lucius Trust in New York City. Big time connection there with Roerich, Alice Bailey, Foster Bailey. And he was all about finding Shambhala. He knew it was real, and he was after it. Now, we'll show you one of his paintings here. And this painting is called The Wanderer. And here we see The Wanderer by Nicholas Roerich. And this is kind of depicting him. Here he is on the road to Shambhala. And he is wandering on his mystic journey looking for that city where the wizards of Shambhala are. And these people took it dead dog serious, and they went after it. And it's a shame, really, and it's by design, that a lot of the like I say, we know about Hitler. We know Hitler, the Alhambra, and his very serious efforts to find the entrance to the Hollow Earth. And the Russians, before Hitler, were very much all about this.
Do you remember, David, and this is, I don't even remember 100%, but I do remember in the show where we investigated the travels of Baron Trump, I believe is what it's called. Do you remember the place he went underground where he had to go through this portal? I believe, if I'm right, it was in this northern mountainous region where he was entering, if I remember correctly.
I believe you're correct.
I'd like to read that again, but there was a lot in that book that was really symbolic.
He's growing pretty good, isn't he? Have you seen that little rascal lately?
Oh, he's not a little rascal anymore.
He's got some genes in him, doesn't he? He's springing
tall.
right up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a big little guy.
He's a big boy. For sure.
Now, in this next book, written by Moi, and this is our book, The Great Seal of the United States. It's called Meaning. It's the first book Sister Don and I ever wrote. But we wrote about Nicholas Roerich and the role he played with the Great Seal going on our dollar bill. And the reason why the Great Seal is on our dollar bill is Nicholas Roerich. And I wrote here at about Henry Wallace. This is on page 56 of our book. And it says, Wallace, who was the vice president, he served 2 terms as vice president. And after he served 2 terms as vice president, he ran for president on the Communist Party. No joke. And his ties, and he was financed and backed by the communists. And Mr. Roerich and Kim were joined at the hip. Now, it says Wallace did induce the Secretary to the Treasury to put the Great Pyramid on the new dollar bill in 1935. His susceptibility to the occult had drawn Wallace in the late 20s into the orbit of a white Russian mystic in the tradition of Blavatsky named Dr. Nicholas Roerich, a painter and an associate in the Moscow Art Theater and the Dihagli Ballet, a friend of Stravinsky and the Ribbentrop Targo. Wallace occasionally called on him at the Roerich Museum on Riverside Drive in New York. Yeah, you can find his little museum right there in New York City, hooked up big time there in New York when the Lucius Trust moved into the UN there. I go on to say, the friendship continued after Wallace went to Washington. He found solace in a strange and protracted correspondence with Roerich and certain of his disciples. The letters, some addressing Roerich as Dear Guru, contained Kabbalistic references to the Flaming One or the Wandering One. And it is because Nicholas Roerich prodded Henry Wallace to prod Henry Morgenthau and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who were all Freemasons. It wasn't hard to get him to go for it. That in 1935, the pyramid and the Great Seal went on the dollar bill there in 1935. And isn't it interesting that it's a Russian searching for Shambala that was able to pull that off? I find that quite interesting and also quite impressive.
Yeah.
Now, back again here to man, myth, and magic, and we're going to talk about another fella that is very, very interesting. And if you have a discussion of Russian mystics and Russian occultists, you cannot leave this guy out, and that is Mr. Rasputin. And Rasputin, who lived, he was murdered, and it's so interesting. It tells in this article the story of his death, and it says here, when this guy, Felix Usupov, he decided to kill Rasputin. And it said he had prepared a dish of cakes impregnated with cyanide and a bottle of poisoned wine. And he invited Rasputin to take some cakes. Rasputin ate 2 or 3 to the astonishment of Yusupov. Rasputin then became merry and said, "Come on, get your guitar and sing to me." And he finally just got so frustrated, he took his gun out and shot him. But evidently, according to this account of the fellow that actually killed him, that the poison, wine, and food didn't have any effect on Mr. Rasputin. And funny stuff going on there. But the gun did, and in 1916, Mr. Rasputin was killed. And he became, he traveled into this area, and he became involved with a certain cult. And I find the name of it here. It's not any cult that I'd ever heard of, or I'm sure you probably have either. But they learned how to heal, how to cast out devils, and they basically were mimicking the miracles of the New Testament. And at that time, many of you know the story of Tsar Alexander and Taristia and the 3 children. Alexia was the boy. I can't remember the names of the girls. But the Bolsheviks slaughtered them in the most brutal and horrific way. When the Communist Revolution came in 1917 and overthrew the Russian monarchy, the Alexander and Tarzina and the 3 children, they were killed in the most horrific way. It was just brutal and disgusting. And they are still deeply beloved, and we're going to talk in a little bit about a movement within Russia to bring back the monarchy. That's something very few people in the West even know anything about or understand. But in the Greek Orthodox Church, they actually, there are icons of Alexander, Tarzina, and the three children. And there is definitely a move underfoot in Russia to bring back the monarchy. Now, the interesting thing about Rasputin, the son of Alexander and Tarzina was Alexei, and he was a hemophiliac. And when he would cut himself, he would bleed profusely, and the only thing that could stop his bleeding was Rasputin. And Rasputin could touch that boy when he was bleeding, and the bleeding would stop. And this endeared Rasputin to Alexander and Tarzina. He moved within the cult of the Romanovs, and he was an extremely, extremely influential figure, and he was a very, very dark and a radical figure. It says here in this article that this cult that he became a part of was called the Kailisti, and he said that they were called the Christ Bearers. And he said the task of the Christ bearers was to inculcate the gift of prophecy, to teach the technique of healing through prayer, and to learn how to expel demons, in all of which Grigory Rasputin became proficient. He also accepted the heretical dogma that to repent, one must first commit sin. Hello, Sabotage Zevi. We did a midnight ride that we had to take over to the Rumble channel, and we dealt with Sabotage Zevi. Yeah. And in 1666, he was a Kabbalist that laid claim to being the Messiah, and he talked about the holy sinner. And he said that to be really holy, you had to be really a big sinner. And Rasputin bought into the same doctrine that before you could repent, you had to first really deliberately sin. So Rasputin is a very, very dark and influential figure. There are all kinds of tales about this individual that would portray him to make one think that he might have been more than just human.
Yeah, I think so. I was, you're talking about the Russian, that secret society, well, not really a society, I guess a club that wants to reintroduce the royalty of Russia. And of course, if you look at who is left of the descendants of the Romanovs, and I've got a list here of about 4 or 5 people here. One of them here is Maria Vladimirovna. Maria Vladimirovna, she's the Grand Duchess of Russia. You have Prince Andrew Romanov, who he's the great-grandson of Nicholas I. Then you have, of course, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who is King Charles' father, which passed on that Romanov blood to a kingship. And then you have Prince Olga Romanov, and then Michael of Kent, and then a couple others. But really the only one with actual power like they would be looking for out of all of these, I believe we'll have to go to King Charles. I mean, if you look at all of these different people. Yeah. So that's another interesting note there, especially based on all we found out about King Charles.
Yeah. And this is a very, very important point. And the only reason I have found this stuff out is because I've dug for it. I've read for it and I've dug for it, and I've read Russian historians and Russian writers. You got to do that if you're going to learn their perspective and how they think of themselves and what's really going on. Now, like John said, and why is it important? Why is it important that we've got people in the Romanov dynasty that was slaughtered? Alexander, Tarzina, and the 3 children slaughtered in 1917. And it is for this very fact that the Romanov dynasty is tied into King Charles. Now, this is a fella here by the name of Alexander Dugin. He is considered to be kind of the Rasputin to Mr. Putin. And he's a very insider. He's close to Vladimir Putin. And John has actually had some contact with Alexander Dugin. Do you want to share that, or do we
Sure,
just
yeah.
want to keep that quiet?
Well, this was right before the election, before Hillary and Trump were running for the election. Someone from the Kremlin, actually, I had on a show, interviewed that person, and I had contact with Alexander Dugin via text messages, and he was going to actually come on the show to be interviewed. It was really weird how it all got set up, kind of creepy in a way. And actually, there was even talks of me going to Russia to do this, and I thankfully none of that ever happened. But after this happened, this is when all of the speculation about Russia interfering in the election, Donald Trump having close ties with Russia, and then I got ghosted by them. So that's kind of the story of that. There's not a whole lot to tell, but interesting. And from what I read, David, everything you said about Dugin is 100% dead on. This is what they're saying about him. He's lines up with that, and of course, with the 1666, you talked about the doctrine of the Franks and the Illuminati, etc., communists. This would be the perfect cover for a man like that, would it not?
It absolutely would. And this is an extremely influential fellow, someone that has the ear of Putin. And the thing about Mr. Dugin, he is a philosopher, and he is a Russian philosopher. And to understand the way the Russian people look at themselves, you have to understand Mr. Dugin to a certain degree. And he would be called a traditionalist. And Mr. Dugin, he can defend the ancient pagan ways of the ancient pagan cults of Russia, and boy, there's a bunch of them. And he can also defend the Greek Orthodox Church. Why? Because these are all the traditions of Mother Russia. So whether it's the Greek Orthodox Church or whether it's the pagan cults, it's all good because that's our tradition. We are Mother Russia. That's good. We're tradition. And, we think, well, that's weird. Well, it's really not. We think the same way. And I remember an interview that or a broadcast that Glenn Beck and Sarah Palin did in the site with the Statue of Liberty in the background.
Yeah.
So there we are. Well, America's good, Christianity's good, but also that idol out in the harbor, that's good. It's America. It's our tradition. So we think the same way, don't we? Think very much the same way. It's not really that strange.
Yeah.
But something that's extremely profound about Mr. Dugin, he supports the idea of bringing back the Russian monarchy. Now, in my thought, how in the world could Putin put up with that? But he does. He likes it. So there's something going on there. I don't know all just what it is, but there could be a power play there to somehow, and I won't even speculate, but the key to understanding that is the link between the Romanov dynasty and King Charles. So there's something really going on there. Now, this is what Mr. Dugin wrote. It says, uppermost would be someone who embodies the will of the people. This is not so much a dynastic arrangement as a vertical organization of society in which the monarch is not the servant of the people, but the people are the servants of the monarch. But who wants to be the servant of another person? We are willing to be slaves of God, to obey one who does not act on his own behalf, but in the name of a higher power. Hence the idea of the sacred nature of the monarchy. Without the sacred, it is despotism, tyranny. So the idea of a monarchy ruled by a messianic, godlike figure. So this is very compelling to me, and I find it deeply fascinating, and it's something that we really want to keep an eye on and watch, because this could be very, very significant. I want to read a statement here from Occult Russia from another guy that lived through the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. and he is a Russian writer called Solanovich. And he said this, and we've done a lot of teachings about the Nag Hammadi codices and about Yaldabaoth, who was basically the devil in the Nag Hammadi codexes, and he claimed that the Bolsheviks were possessed by the spirit of Yaldabaoth. And not only them, but he believed that also the Roman Catholics were possessed. I'll just read what he says here. It's just some food for thought here. But he said the principle, this is Solanovich, who lived through and survived the Bolshevik Revolution. He said the principle of power has been injected into humanity as a disease similar to syphilis. It is necessary to fight mercilessly against this madness because the tracks of Yaldabaoth are crawling with larvae, and demonic filth pollutes the souls of the people and their lives. Among the most powerful fanatics of power for whom the end justifies the means, we find Ivan IV, Philip II, Loyola, and he considered the Jesuits, well, good for you, Solanovich. I think you got that one right. Torquemada, who was the engineer of the Inquisition, Lenin, Marx, and others, all of them were under the direct control of the angels of Yaldabaoth in one form or another. And it's very interesting, the position of we could call them the monarchist Russians, is that not only were these Marx and Lenin and the Bolsheviks directly under the agents of this of Yaldabaoth, but also the people on the Roman Catholic side, the Pope, Torquemada, and the Jesuits. That's just something to get your motor running a little bit. Now, we're going to have a couple things here from Anatoly Fomenko, and this is something else that is the way that the Russian people look at themselves, and certainly some Russian historians. And this fella was, I have never drawn a direct line between Mr. Putin and Mr. Fomenko, but I know that they were both educated in Leningrad. So anyway, and Mr. Fomenko was big within the educational circles and the historical circles in Leningrad. So it's a given that Mr. Putin knows about Mr. Fomenko and has probably had to have studied his writings. But anyway, let's look at what it says here on page 330. And John is going to pull a map up here. And this is a map from Fomenko's book. And you'll notice here we have America. And in the upper left part of this map, there's a big blank. And there's a lot of maps like this. The pre-1776 maps of America, most of them are like this, with a big blank up in the Pacific Northwest. Now, Mr. Fomenko has an answer for that. On page 328, this is History, Fact, or Fiction. No, excuse me, History, Fiction, or Science. This is volume 4, and this is on page 328. And he talks about the formation of the United States in 1776, the annexation of the American territories of the Muscovite Tartaria. The Muscovite Tartaria. And what Mr. Fomenko claims that in 1776, America annexed Tartaria from the Russians. Now, what else he goes on to say, and there is, that's not totally without, some substantiation. Now, he goes on to say this, and this is very compelling. He says, the above means that the United States of America were founded spontaneously in 1776, comprising the American fragment of the great Mongolian Empire, namely the American part, of Muscovite Tartaria. This circumstance was never recorded in any history textbook. The topic must have been tabooed initially and then forgotten together. Independence from British rule became the official version. Now, we have talked, and John has done a broadcast not long ago on Prince Charles, and we did a midnight ride on that, and we bandied about the idea that perhaps America was not that free from British control as we might like to think.
Yeah, I think to think that all of our history about 1776, the Revolution, to think that these characters who we know were Freemasons from the London Lodge rose up against their own lodges, their own people, to do this is really interesting to me. I know I'm not going to say it didn't happen. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say that it's possible that it didn't happen like the way that we're told. We're given this huge hero story about George Washington getting shot with bullets and it going through his clothes but not piercing him. He is given the title of Baal in our country, by means of the big phallic symbol Washington Monument there in Washington, D.C. He's given an empty grave there in Washington, D.C. The symbolism, you can't shake the symbolism. It's the same symbolism of the lodge, which we know that there's a spiritual rule, like you talked about, David, right? We've been talking about this the whole show. There's a spiritual rule, and then there's a political rule, and those always don't make sense. In fact, I think, in my opinion, just based off of stuff that I've learned, and I know, David, you have the same opinion as me, but even off of hearing something Kissinger said the other day, there is an outside story presented to us, but behind closed doors, there's a whole nother story that we'll never hear. Kissinger made it clear that China and USA need to make sure that relationship, to where there's a public relationship and a private relationship when it comes to their affairs, and in a speech he just made not too long ago. But this is, David, when you talk about the idea of Tartaria being over here, I wrote something down here, but you have obviously Fort Ross. For those of you that don't believe it's possible, check out Fort Ross in California. It's there, believe it or not. There's a Russian fort right there in California. And the Order of the Dragon, David, is another interesting order that kind of leads me to believe that these orders are higher than the leaders of our country. This is the orders that actually rule things. The Order of the Dragon is actually based out of Hungary, interesting enough, the Hungarian thing, but the King of England is a part of it. The Russians are a part of it. This is like where you have the symbolism of Michael slaying the dragon, or George slaying the dragon. You have all of this stuff. So anyways, to make a long story short, what you were talking about here, most definitely, man, like I think that this all tied in a big way, and I think the comeback of Tartaria is something that we've been trying to say for a long time, but the comeback of Tartaria is going to be one of those comebacks that most people have never even knew we're here to begin with. I mean, had no idea that we have literally probably been ruled over the whole United States by Tartaria, possibly still to this day. We just don't understand it or know it. Just looking at a lot of the policies, David. I mean, one of the policies of taking in scientists from Germany, the policies of putting these people in charge of our banter, our propaganda, putting them in charge of our science, putting them in charge of all of that. To me, it just shows that they're actually in charge. And of course, Germany and Russia are the same people group that we're talking about here, pretty much.
Yeah. And it's profound to me that Mr. Fomenko hints at that the independence from Britain might not be as independent as we might think. And the fact that also the Russian monarchy that many want to bring back is linked with that in Great Britain. I don't know all exact what's going on here, but I know there's something a brewing here with all of this. Yeah. And also, did we win the War of Independence? Yes, but maybe not to the extent we might think. And I refer back to another Midnight Ride we did where we talked about a book by John Coleman, The Committee of 300. Mr. Coleman was someone from British intelligence that was a whistleblower, and he claimed that there was a secret society called the Committee of 300 that was run by the royal family, and that they basically controlled the affairs of the world by placing people on the boards of Fortune 500 companies. Yeah. And very interesting concept, but the more you look, the more sense that makes. And also, we've talked a lot about, well, did we win World War II? Well, yes, but maybe not to the extent we thought. And we've talked a lot about the extenuation of the Nazis through not only the American but also the Russian. But we've talked about these things, but it's very, very interesting that these concepts and how they're viewed by the people in Russia. Now, in Ezekiel 38, 1 and 2, and the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshish and Tuval, and prophesy against him. And it's interesting, and I'll read one more thing here from Mr. Fomenko, but he and also many other Russian religious and historical scholars, they believe they're Gog and Magog. You know, just like Attila the Hun, I'm the Antichrist. He was all about it. Well, they believe that they are Gog and Magog. And, think about that. And you can kind of see they're about destiny. They're about tradition. They're about fulfilling the destiny that they believe they have. And they have a huge role to play here. Now, I want to read a little bit here from Mr. Fomenko, and I'll just read a few things here on page 88 and 89 of Volume 4, where he talks a lot about the concept that Russia is Gog and Magog. He says here, it produces a fragment of the Ostrog Bible where the Prince of Ross is explicitly referred to as the Russian prince. He says the book of Genesis 4:26 mentions Rosh. Likewise, the horde of Genesis, Gog and Magog, are mentioned in the book of Revelation. Certain historians had used the name Gog and Magog for referring to the Khazars. Now, boy, we could go there for a while, couldn't we?
Kostler's book mentions that 13th tribe.
Yeah. Gog and Magog. And by the way, most of the people in Israel today, boy, they are not Semites. They're from the tribe of Japheth. They are Khazars. Going on, and they believe them, Gog and Magog. Okay, boy, get your mind around that. He goes on to say the names Gog and Magog, as well as Magog, Gog, and Magog, apply to the same nations of the Russian and the Tatars who had founded the empire of Magog, the great empire. The word Tubal is a reference to the Tobol region in western Siberia. And the name Rosh is I could go on and on. There's page of this where Mr. Fomenko brings facts and documentation to proudly own the fact that Russia is Gog and Magog, and that they believe that they have a destiny to fulfill. And this plays large, when you talk about the Russian people, and we'll show here this final slide. This is a picture of Rodina. Here she is on a stamp, holding up the sword, leading the armies in battle. This is Mother Russia. And when you talk about, if somebody gets teary-eyed and a lump in their throat, you start talking about Mother Russia. And this digs deep down into the traditionalist. And this is a very powerful movement within Russia. And Russia is in a lot of turmoil, just like our country is. And these are good things for us to understand and file away as we watch these end-time prophetic alignments unfold. So there you got it. We got the avatars of Tartaria, the mystics of Shambala, and a little bit of the role they're playing right now and what they will in the future.
Yeah, man, it's amazing the symbolism we see. You know, just going back to the Gog Magog thing, the symbolism in London, in the Lord Mayor's show where they carry the giants through the street, showing people that they owe basically the life of London to this giant. And to me, this is symbology. Like there's a book that myself and Adam kind of edited it, and also put artwork to it. But it tells the story in a symbolic form of these giants, Gog Magog. It talks about all this stuff. But to me, it almost is showing an allegiance, a story about allegiance, a story about how this group of people, not just an actual giant, but a group of people saved London. And for that, they're ever grateful. And I think that it's pretty clear that not only are they forever grateful, but they've also got a king that belongs to that bloodline in their kingship. So there's correlation there, right? And you start to see it more if you can think in those terms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there could be events unfolding that we could understand if we keep some of these concepts in mind, because they're unfolding right now. I guarantee the shoe's dropping right now.
Fantastic stuff, David. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak about these things openly and speak about them with you and learn some things as well in this subject. This is one of those timeless pieces that you can look at and say, you know, this helps put together puzzle pieces. Every time we talk about this, there's more and more being put together. And so if you enjoyed what you listened to tonight, hit the subscribe button right now. Make sure to get notifications. We do this every week. More to come on this channel. Also, go check out our other channels. Subscribe to them. Hit the like button. We do this thing we call the Pounder's Pound, where we pound. We don't just hit the like button. We don't just tap it. We just pound it. We pound that like button, and we do it all together. And David, count us down, man.
And it's important that when you hit that like button, you do it with a little bit of attitude. You got to have a little attitude now. So on the count of 3, with a little attitude, hit that like button. 1, 2, 3, boom.
Boom. That was good, man. I felt that one. I felt the rumbles coming from it as people literally harass that like button.
Little attitude in the house tonight.
Little attitude, little bit of spicy button hitting there. We appreciate it a ton, guys, and we couldn't do this without you. All of you who support us, and in any way you do that, whether it be through sharing, whether it be through donating, whether it be through whatever, we appreciate you guys. Like I said, we couldn't do this without you. The stuff we talk about, man, you know, this is unique, I believe. I believe it's unique, and I'm thankful to be a part of it. So with that being said, David, if you got anything else, go for it and end us out.
Well, there's so much more, it never ends, but there was one final concept that we might throw on the table here, the understanding that the term Third Rome keeps coming up among these people, that they see Moscow as the Third Rome, which is could have some prophetic implications, couldn't it? But yeah. We're thankful, we really are, to our Midnight Ride listeners and to those of you that support NYSTV and FOJC Radio. We thank you so much from the bottom of our heart. We really need the support of the people to enable us to bring this to light. Everything we talk about is suppressed by the mainline political social media platforms and the religious leaders, you know. So, you know, it's because of you, the people, that, you know, we're not playing buddy with the powers that be. We're speaking the truth, and we're looking for the Lord and you all to get the job done. And I tell you what, if God be for you, who could be against you? But thank you from the very bottom of our heart. We love you very much. And until next Saturday night, 10 p.m. Central, high five and good night, everybody, from the Midnight Ride.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up, rise up.